I never thought I would witness something so shocking in my entire life. These are the words that escaped my lips as I stood frozen on the cracked concrete sidewalk of 1423 Willow Street in Savannah, Georgia at precisely 3:17 p.m. on a humid Tuesday afternoon. The smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the corner cafe mixed with the faint scent of jasmine from Mrs. Thompson's garden across the street. I had been passing by on my usual 3-mile walk when the scene unfolded in front of me. A scene I would never forget. In exactly 15 minutes, everything I thought I knew about family loyalty, respect, and civility would be completely shattered. And I promise you what happened next will leave you questioning who you really trust and how thin the veneer of politeness can be. I was just adjusting the strap of my worn leather messenger bag, a gift from my late father in 1976, when I saw her Mary Ellen Johnson, my daughter-in-law. She was standing in the driveway of the brown brick house at 1423 Willow Street, her hand raised, and in the blink of an eye, she slapped her mother-in-law, Barbara Johnson, over the house. Keys, a metallic jingle of keys, scattering across the concrete, echoed in the quiet neighborhood, and the look on Barbara's face was one of pure shock and disbelief. She had spent 45 years of her life meticulously organizing her home, saving every penny from her $34,762 Social Security check and her modest savings account to help her children and grandchildren. And now, in front of several neighbors, including old Mr. Henderson from 1421, who was filming the incident on his iPhone, the sense of betrayal was palpable. Mary Ellen's face was red with frustration, and her voice was sharp like a whip as she said, "I am tired of this control. I am tired pretending everything is fine." Barbara looked down at the keys that had fallen at her feet and murmured in a trembling voice, "But I only wanted to keep them safe for everyone." It was in that split second that I realized I was not just witnessing a family squabble. I was seeing years of unresolved tension, resentment, and unspoken humiliation erupt into physical reality. The children next door peeked through the chain-link fence, their eyes wide and mouths open. And across the street, the Johnsons, neighbors who had lived in Savannah since the 1960s, were whispering among themselves about how scandalous it was that such a quiet street could suddenly become a stage for confrontation. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and the heat of the Georgia sun made the asphalt radiate warm through the soles of my sneakers. I had no idea how long I would stand there rooted to the spot as the argument escalated. Barbara's voice quivered with years of suppressed anger and hurt, while Mary Ellen's words cut through the air with precision. She said with disdain, "You never appreciate what anyone does for you." Barbara's hands shook as she tried to pick up the keys, and the sound of the metal hitting the pavement again made me flinch. I could see the patter of the cracks on the driveway, each one telling a story of countless summers of children playing in family gatherings, and now serving as a stage for this drama. I whispered to myself, and anyone listening, I cannot believe this is happening in front of me. And as I looked around, I noticed several other people gathering across the street from the corner store. A young couple with a stroller stopped mid-stroll, the smell of baby powder and freshly cut grass mixing the air, while a man on a bike paused and held up his phone, recording every angle. The tension was tangible like electricity in the humid Savannah air, and I felt compelled to speak, even though I knew my voice would not stop the unfolding chaos. I cleared my throat and said loudly, "Can someone please calm down?" But my words were lost in a flurry of emotions, and the sharp slap that had echoed just moments before still lingered in my ears like a warning. I saw Barbara bend down to collect the keys and Mary Ellen cross her arms and tapped her foot impatiently. The wind carried their words in fragments. I could hear things like, "I deserve respect," and "You never listened to me." And the neighbors began murmuring their agreements, some nodding their heads, some shaking in disbelief. The scene had the intensity of a storm building slowly, yet undeniably approaching a breaking point. I checked my watch. It was exactly 3:21 p.m. Only 4 minutes had passed, but it felt like hours as I realized that in the next 11 minutes, everything could change, and I needed to witness it all to understand the depth of the injustice and the human emotions involved. I remember thinking, if you have ever felt powerless in a situation where respect, loyalty, and love were dismissed, this is exactly what it feels like. And I turned to the camera on my phone, remembering Mr. Henderson filming the incident. I raised mine too and whispered to the viewers, "You will not believe what happens next. Make sure you stay until the end. And if you have ever been treated unfairly by someone close to you, comment below. I want to know if you felt the same shock and disbelief that I felt in that very moment in the hot, sticky air of Savannah, Georgia, with the sound of keys clattering on concrete, the distant rumble of a passing school bus, and the smell of fresh pastries from a corner cafe mingling with the tension. I realized that this was only the beginning, And what unfolded in the next 15 minutes would redefine everything about what I thought family meant and who held the real power. I had been living in Savannah, Georgia for over 32 years and had walked the same route down Willow Street every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at precisely 2:59 p.m. The smell of the ocean breeze mixed with the faint aroma of honeysuckle climbing the fences and the creak of the old wooden porch on number 1423 was a familiar comfort that I never imagined would become the backdrop for such a violent. Confrontation Barbara Johnson had been part of this neighborhood since 1978, moving in with her. Husband Robert Johnson in a modest 2-story brown brick house with peeling white trim and a mailbox that still bore the faded letters of their family name. She had spent decades building a sense of order, generosity, and care that touched nearly every neighbor, from delivering freshly baked pecan pies during the holidays to babysitting the Thompson twins across the street. She was known for her meticulous attention to detail, saving receipts of every purchase from her local Walmart and Kroger stores, and keeping meticulous track of every cent saved from her $34,762 annual Social Security check, plus the modest $12,500 she managed to invest in bonds over the years. I remembered her telling me one Tuesday morning, as I passed with my tote bag filled with groceries, she said with a proud smile, "Wilson, every dollar I save is for my children and grandchildren, so they never feel the pinch that we did in the 60s and 70s, the smell of her cinnamon apple muffins lingering in the kitchen while the old clock ticked 10. 3 a.m. and the rustle of the newspaper on the kitchen table, adding to the cozy scene now. That same woman was being publicly humiliated over a set of keys that represented far more than metal, and rings that represented trust, decades of investment, and an expectation that basic respect would be honor. Her daughter-in-law, Mary Ellen Johnson, had been part of the family for 8 years, marrying her son Thomas Johnson on June 14th. 2015 at the Magnolia Plantation Chapel. The wedding had cost exactly $14,872, and Barbara had contributed $4,500 to the florist catering and vintage decor, not counting the $1,200 she spent on a silk dress she had, painstakingly restored to fit perfectly for the occasion. Even before the incident, I had noticed small cracks in the relationship, subtle signs of disrespect that most people overlooked at 5 p.m. on a Thursday morning. I had seen Mary Ellen roll her eyes while Barbara explained the proper placement of holiday decorations in the living room at 1423. Willow Street, the air smelled faintly of pine and wax as the lights glimmered off the glass ornaments. Barbara's voice was calm but firm, and Mary Ellen muttered under her breath, "I can't believe how controlling. You are no one ever listens to me," and I had dismissed it as minor family tension. But now it was clear that those micro insults had been simmering for years, building like a storm cloud ready to burst. Barbara had spent countless nights organizing family budgets, calculating grocery expenses down to the last penny, keeping exact records on her old green ledger from 1986, the pages yellowed and frayed at the corners, every entry precise and detailed, a testament to her dedication and care. She had sewn quilts for each grandchild, each stitch measured and intentional, the smell of cotton and thread filling the air, the sound of her Singer sewing machine humming like a low purr echoing through the house. Each evening at 7:18 p.m. as Thomas and Mary Ellen watched TV in the living room, she had imagined that her efforts would be recognized, appreciated, and most importantly respected, yet all of that investment had been dismissed in an instant when Mary Ellen's slap landed and the keys clattered across the concrete driveway. I could hear snippets of conversations she had had over the years with friends at the corner cafe, like when she confided to Mrs. Clark at 1425 Willow Street on March 12th. 2019, over 2 cups of freshly brewed dark roast coffee that she had spent over $3 for refurbishing the old Johnson kitchen because she wanted her son to feel pride in the home they grew up in and her daughter-in-law to feel welcomed. Yet Mary Ellen's growing impatience and apparent disdain had gone unaddressed except for fleeting glances and polite corrections that Barbara gave while maintaining dignity. She had hoped her kindness and investment would earn trust, not contempt, and yet the scene unfolding at 3:17 p.m. on that Tuesday afternoon was a culmination of years of being underestimated and disrespected. Even the neighbors would gather across the street, whisper among themselves, recalling past generosity from Barbara handing out $25 gift cards to the elderly neighbors struggling to pay rent. In 2018, the smell of fresh bakery bread from Mrs. Thompson mixing with the salty tang of the Savannah river breeze, the echoes of laughter from family barbecues in 1983, all of these small moments now starkly contrasted with the anger on Mary Ellen's face, the tapping of her high-heeled shoes on the concrete driveway, and the sharp sound of her voice slicing through the heavy air. She said, "You never appreciate anything," and Barbara quietly responded with a slight quiver in her voice, "I only wanted to help." And that quiver carried decades of suppressed emotions, memories of hard work and devotion. I noticed then how the seemingly ordinary suburban neighborhood was a stage for this dramatic reveal of tension built over time, like cracks forming in old Savannah brickwork. Ready to split under the pressure, the neighbors whispered dates and amounts like August 5th, 1979, when Barbara lent $2,400 to her son for his college tuition, or December 14th, 1994, when she funded the remodeling of the small kitchen to create a family-friendly space. These precise numbers became proof of her enduring investment, and the lack of reciprocity became increasingly apparent as I watched Mary Ellen's impatience turn to open contempt, each moment stretching longer than the last, and I felt an involuntary shiver as the tension in the humid Savannah afternoon seemed to thicken to a nearly tangible weight. As the scene stretched past 3:25 p.m., the onlookers shifted from mere curiosity to shared indignation, murmuring with exclamations like, "How could she do that to her own mother-in-law?" Or, "I can't believe this is happening here on our quiet street." The smell of barbecue smoke from a neighbor's grill on Maple Avenue, blending strangely with the floral aroma drifting from the Johnson's garden, the distant honk of a delivery truck, and the click of camera shutters capturing every nuance. I realized that this moment was a collision of past generosity, present disrespect, and human fallibility. And I whispered to myself, and anyone following the story online, wait until you see what happens next, what you would do if you were in Barbara's shoes. And the layers of history, investment, and betrayal were about to explode in the most unexpected way. By 3:28 p.m., the tension on Willow Street in Savannah, Georgia had escalated beyond what I could have imagined standing on the cracked sidewalk. I could see Mary Ellen Johnson pacing back and forth in the driveway of 1423, the faint rustle of her silk blouse mixing with the soft thump of her beige high heels against the concrete, while Barbara Johnson crouched slightly picking up the scattered keys, her hands trembling and her knuckles white from gripping the metal rings, each jingle echoing across the street and drawing more neighbors to witness the unfolding scene. Even old Mr. Henderson from number 1421 was now leaning over his white picket fence, filming on his iPhone as he whispered to his wife in a hushed tone, "You better record this. It's going to be a story people talk about for years." It was a series of micro-humiliations that added up to something much larger. Mary Ellen threw the keys back at Barbara, saying with cutting sarcasm, "I guess you can't even handle something as simple as keys." Barbara tried to respond calmly with a quiet voice, "I only wanted to help," but her words were drowned out by Mary Ellen's growing volume, and the slap she had already delivered earlier now seemed like a warning shot. The air smelled faintly of freshly mowed grass from the neighbor's yard, and the warm scent of maple pecan pie from the corner cafe lingered, as if mocking the tension unfolding in front of us. The children from across the street pressed their faces against the chain-link fence, eyes wide, mouths open, and murmured, "I can't believe this is happening," while the neighbors whispered similar sentiments echoing off the brick walls of the Johnson house. I could see Barbara straighten her posture and attempt a polite request. "Mary Ellen, please stop. This is not how we treat family." But Mary Ellen's response was sharp, dismissive, and cutting as she snapped, "I am done," pretending everything is fine, and waved her hand dismissively. The humiliation intensified as Mrs. Thompson from 1427 and her husband walked by, shaking their heads. They had witnessed Barbara hosting free sewing classes every Thursday for over 3 years, teaching neighborhood children, and now all that dedication seemed invisible. Mary Ellen's voice grew louder, and the words cut like knives. "You think your sacrifices mean anything to me?" And at that moment, Barbara's face flushed with embarrassment, but she maintained a stoic dignity. The neighbors murmured in disbelief. Some took out phones to record the escalating argument. Others whispered about the injustice unfolding in real time. Even I felt my stomach churn at the intensity as the tension thickened in the humid Savannah air at 3:31 p.m. I noticed Mary Ellen grab the edge of the small metal mailbox and slam it against the post, a clang reverberating across the street. Barbara flinched and muttered, "I only wanted to keep things organized," and the sound of the keys jingling again as they slid across the driveway added to the drama. I could hear fragments of her voice pleading with her daughter-in-law, while Mary Ellen's tone was icy. You never appreciate anything I do for this family. And the neighbors were now murmuring in a mixture of shock and judgment. How could she talk to her mother-in-law like that? The scene had taken on a public dimension, with Mr. Henderson recording every angle, his wife nodding in agreement, capturing the indignation for posterity. Barbara tried one more time to assert her dignity, reaching for the keys and saying firmly, "Mary Ellen, you don't need to do this in front of everyone." Her voice carried the weight of decades of patience and quiet service. Yet Mary Ellen crossed her arms and tilted her chin up with an expression of superiority. "I can do whatever I want in this house. It's mine now." And the humiliation reached a crescendo when the young couple with the stroller across the street turned their heads in disbelief. The soft cooing of the baby and the faint squeak of the stroller wheels punctuating the sharpness of Mary Ellen's words. I could feel the collective breath of the neighbors holding in suspense, and I realized that tolerance had reached its limit and that the public spectacle was pushing Barbara to a breaking point. The final straw came at 3:34 p.m. when Mary Ellen, in a calculated gesture, tossed a folded sheet of paper onto the driveway in front of Barbara, saying loudly, "I don't need your list, your budget, your rules, and your stupid ledgers anymore." As the paper flapped in the wind, the neighbors gasped, some whispering, "This is unbelievable," and a couple of teenagers walking home from school stopped and recorded on their phones. I could smell the faint aroma of Mary Ellen's expensive perfume mingling with the heat of the asphalt, while Barbara's hands trembled as she reached down to retrieve the paper, the weight of humiliation pressing down on her shoulders, and the air was so thick you could almost taste a mixture of anticipation, dread, and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle from the garden across the street. At that moment, I felt something shift in Barbara's demeanor, the quiet resignation giving way to a subtle steel in her eyes and a posture that no longer trembled but held a controlled intensity. As if a switch had been flipped, the neighbors exchanged glances, some nodding in approval, others still in shock. The scene had become a crescendo of injustice witnessed by every person within sight. And yet I could sense that the worst was not yet over, and that Barbara's response would be decisive in ways no one expected. And I whispered to the viewers watching online and to myself, "Wait until you see what happens next. What would you do if every effort of your life had been dismissed and ridiculed in front of everyone you knew in the neighborhood? Would you continue to tolerate, or would you act?" And the tension was almost unbearable as the clock ticked 3:36 p.m., marking exactly 19 minutes since the first slap and the promise of a turning point looming just beyond reach. By 3:38 p.m. on Willow Street, Savannah, Georgia, the summer sun had intensified the humid air, and Barbara Johnson stood in the driveway of 1423 Willow Street, her back straight, shoulders squared, and eyes scanning Mary Ellen Johnson, as if measuring every move. The smell of honeysuckle from across the street, mixed with the faint aroma of roasted peanuts from Mr. Henderson's small cart outside his gate, and the soft murmur of neighbors whispering about the escalating drama, created a charged atmosphere. Barbara had spent decades investing emotionally, financially, and physically in this family, from saving $3,500 in 1979 to pay her son's tuition to spending $4,250 in 1994 for home renovations and sewing 32 quilts for grandchildren from 1983 to 2015, each stitch a labor of love. Now, every one of those sacrifices felt like invisible currency, dismissed and spat upon in front of everyone, including the young couple with a stroller, the teenagers filming on their phones, and Mrs. Thompson peeking through her lace curtains. I watched her inhale slowly, and in that moment something shifted. A quiet storm brewing beneath decades of patience surfaced. She glanced down at the keys scattered like fallen coins across the driveway, and then at the crumpled paper Mary Ellen had tossed at her feet. Barbara's jaw tightened, and a calm clarity settled over her like a cloak. The neighbors noticed it, too. The hum of whispered speculation halted briefly, as if the air itself recognized the change. Her voice, when she spoke, was measured, deliberate, and carried the weight of authority and quiet power. Mary Ellen crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently, said, "I've had enough." And Barbara replied in a voice so calm yet firm, "You are mistaken. If you think this ends here, I have given decades of my life to this family. And the truth is I am not powerless." And everyone within sight, including myself, could feel that subtle shift in the dynamics of control. Barbara's first move was strategic, not emotional. She bent down to retrieve the keys and the paper, and then straightened her posture, her fingers brushing the rough texture of the concrete driveway, while the metal rings jingled softly. In her hand, the click of her wristwatch indicated 3:39 p.m., precisely marking 19 minutes and 40 seconds since the initial slap, and the witnesses held their breath as if counting down to something monumental. She took a small step back, assessing Mary Ellen's Stance the tightness in her shoulders, the impatience in her gaze, the subtle twitch of her left hand, and Barbara's own heartbeat steady, like a metronome, underscoring a new kind of confidence that had replaced trembling vulnerability. I remember the exact moment I realized Barbara was no longer just reacting. She was preparing a response that would change everything. The corners of her mouth lifted in a barely perceptible line. A controlled exhale released the tension in her shoulders, and she whispered under her breath, "I will no longer allow this humiliation." And the words carried to humid Savannah air, almost inaudible yet charged with intent. Mary Ellen noticed it too, and her brow furrowed, slightly unsure for first time since the confrontation began. Barbara moved closer to the house, retrieving a thick folder from the top drawer of her antique oak cabinet. Inside the front hall, the subtle scent of lemon polish and age was filling the air as she flipped through meticulously organized documents, contracts, receipts, bank statements, all dated and numbered, some from as far back as 1978. Neighbors leaned closer to the fence, murmuring, "Is she going to do something? I can't believe it." And I whispered to myself the same thing. What would you do if all your decades of patience, knowledge, and resources had been disregarded in front of a growing audience of witnesses? What steps would you take to regain control when someone who thinks they have power over you is about to discover that they are mistaken? The air was thick with anticipation, the distant sound of a car horn on Maple Avenue. Punctuating the quiet determination, Barbara exuded, her eyes locked on Mary Ellen as she began to outline a plan in her mind, recalling exact dates and figures. The $4.500 contribution to the wedding florist on June 14th, 2015, the $3.200 she had spent in 1983 for the kitchen, remodeled, the countless hours spent teaching neighborhood children to sew and organize small community events, all quietly stacking as evidence of her hidden authority and influence. At 3:42 p.m., the energy in the driveway reached a palpable intensity. Barbara took one deliberate step closer to the crumpled paper and picked it up, unfolding it with care, while the neighbors watched silently. Mr. Henderson lowering his phone slightly in anticipation of what was coming next. Her lips pressed together briefly, then parted in a calm yet commanding tone. "I spent decades building trust, respect, and care in this family, and I will no longer allow that to be disregarded." The wind carried her words faintly toward the street corner, where a few more neighbors had gathered. The soft rustle of leaves in the ancient oak across the street punctuated the statement, and even Mary Ellen's eyes widened just slightly, the first flicker of doubt appearing, as she realized that the woman she assumed powerless had a reserve of authority, knowledge, and strategy hidden beneath decades of quiet patience. Barbara's preparation was silent but precise. She adjusted her blouse, brushing the faint smell of rosewater perfume against the air around her fingertips, the folder in her hand, a tangible reminder of years of meticulous organization. And she glanced around the street, noting who was watching, who was recording, who would later recount this exact moment. She held herself steady and uttered quietly to herself and the viewers watching, "Online, wait until you see what happens next. Every effort I have ever made, every cent, every stitch, every hour of dedication is about to be recognized." And the neighborhood could sense a tension hung like a dense fog over the driveway at 1423 Willow Street, Savannah, Georgia. And I whispered the CTA for anyone witnessing or watching online. What would you do if you were in Barbara's shoes? Could you maintain dignity under this kind of humiliation? Would you wait, or would you act? And the clock ticked 3:43 p.m., marking 26 minutes since the first slap, and the atmosphere was electric, a calm before the storm. At 3:44 p.m. on Willow Street, Savannah, Georgia, the humid summer air felt electric as Barbara Johnson slowly opened the thick folder she retrieved from the antique oak drawer inside 1423 Willow Street. The faint scent of lemon polish and aged paper mingling with the aroma of honeysuckle across the street, and the subtle smell of roasted peanuts from Mr. Henderson's small cart. The neighbors and bystanders pressed closer to the white picket fences, their murmurs halting abruptly as they realized something extraordinary was about to unfold. Mary Ellen Johnson's impatience gave way to confusion and a flicker of concern as Barbara methodically laid out precise documents, contract receipts, and bank statements, each dated meticulously, some from as far back as 1978, with exact figures. $4.500 contributed to the wedding florist on June 14th, 2015, $3.200 spent on the kitchen, remodeled December 14th, 1994, $1.200 on her silk dress for the wedding, all meticulously recorded in Barbara's precise handwriting. The keys jingling softly in her hand, echoing across the driveway. Barbara's voice was calm, but carried a weight that forced the attention of everyone on Willow Street. I have spent decades not only investing financially, but emotionally, socially, and morally in this family, she said with quiet authority. And now the evidence of every sacrifice, every act of kindness, every dollar carefully accounted for, is here for everyone to see. The neighbors gasped, some whispering, how could she have hidden all this? And even Mr. Henderson paused his recording, lowering his phone slightly, and all the children across the street watched with wide eyes as the story of quiet decades of dedication unfolded before the faint creak of the oak tree branches above punctuated each word. And Mary Ellen's face paled as she began to grasp the magnitude of Barbara's hidden authority. Barbara continued slowly turning pages, each revealing more proof of her influence and contribution, each document a testament to decades of meticulous planning, generosity, and social maneuvering. She spoke clearly, so the entire street could hear, including the couple with the stroller and teenagers filming on their phones. You may have thought you were in control in this household, that my contributions were irrelevant, that my dedication could be ignored, but the truth is what you never counted on was the depth of my preparation, the breadth of my influence, and precision of my record keeping. And at that moment, a collective gasp rippled to the neighbors as they began to realize Barbara was not the timid mother-in-law they assumed she was. I watched as Mary Ellen took a step back, unsure how to respond, her arms crossed, and the expression on her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. She stammered, I didn't know she had all this, and Barbara's voice cut to the tension even more firmly. This is not about revenge, Mary Ellen. It is about recognition, justice, and respect for the work and love I have poured into this family for decades. Of paper rustled as Barbara held the folder aloft, the sunlight catching the edges of the pages, highlighting the numbers and dates that mapped out her lifetime of investment. Every neighbor leaned closer, some whispering, I can't believe it, I never imagined. And even the distant honk of a delivery truck seemed muted in comparison to the weight of Barbara's revelation. Barbara then revealed another layer of power. Mr. Henderson leaned in from across the fence, whispering to his wife as she showed copies of notarized documents, granting her oversight on certain financial accounts, joint savings, and legally binding family trusts. The precise figures $21, $763.84, and $15, $420.67, clearly outlined and verifiable. Every onlooker could see the extent of her authority. Mary Ellen's jaw dropped. She had underestimated the subtle but substantial power Barbara held. And in that moment, the dynamics shifted completely. The air felt heavier, yet charged with electricity, as Barbara's quiet strength dominated the space. And even the youngest bystander sensed the magnitude of the shift. Neighbors began murmuring affirmations, some nodding in approval, others shaking their heads in disbelief, while the teenagers filming whispered to each other, should we post this? It's unbelievable. The sound of camera shutters clicking from Mrs. Thompson's second-floor window punctuated the tension, and Barbara glanced around the street, meeting eyes with every witness, asserting her presence silently and without aggression, the realization settling in that she had always had the means and intelligence to enforce respect and dignity. The faint buzz of cicadas from the oak trees above mingled with the soft rustle of leaves and the light summer breeze, and in the humid Savannah air, everyone knew the humiliation Mary Ellen tried to inflict had been completely inverted. I remember thinking at that exact moment what Mary Ellen did not realize was the careful orchestration Barbara had maintained over decades, the hidden networks of trust, the financial knowledge, the social leverage, the moral authority. And now, exposed for all to witness, the reaction was immediate shock mingled with Barbara's calm voice. Continued, you will no longer dismiss my contributions or disrespect my role in this family. As the words settled into the consciousness of every observer, the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Mary Ellen's posture slumped for the first time in the confrontation, the arrogance replaced by cautious humility, and even Mr. Henderson whispered to his wife, I never thought I'd see the day someone turned the tables so completely. The revelation reached its climax at precisely 3:50 p.m., 25 minutes and 40 seconds after the initial slap. The neighbors murmured collectively as Barbara Johnson had not only reclaimed dignity, but demonstrated undeniable control over the situation. She had turned years of patience and preparation into a force that even Mary Ellen could not ignore. The keys jingled one last time in her hand as she handed them back with a calm, measured gesture, the soft brush of wind carrying the faint aroma of honeysuckle and roasted peanuts over the street. And I whispered to the viewers online, if this revelation shocks you as much as it shocked me, share the story with someone who needs to see what quiet preparation and dignity can achieve and mark someone who needs to understand the power of patience and hidden authority. By 3:52 p.m. on Willow Street, Savannah, Georgia, the air had shifted completely. The humid summer breeze, carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle and freshly baked pecan pies from across the street, seemed almost celebratory as Barbara Johnson held the keys firmly in her hand, and the folder of documents clutched against her chest. The neighbors leaned forward against their fences, whispering amongst themselves, and the teenagers recording on their phones exchanged astonished glances, murmuring, "I can't believe this is happening live," while Mrs. Thompson from 1427 peeked from her lace-curtained window, shaking her head in disbelief. The rustle of leaves above punctuating the electric tension. Barbara's eyes met Mary Ellen's with calm authority, and she said softly but firmly, "You will now respect the contributions of every member of this family, and failure to do so will not be tolerated." The metallic click of her watch, marking 3:53 p.m., underscored the precision and timing of her response. Mary Ellen's face had gone pale, and her arms fell loosely to her sides as she muttered, "I never realized she had this power." And Barbara responded in measured tones, "It is not about power, it is about accountability, recognition, and fairness." The neighbors gasped as Barbara handed copies of notarized documents detailing $21,763.84 in joint accounts, $15,420.67 in trust allocations, and $4,500 in documented wedding contributions to Mr. Henderson, who was still filming, and whispered under his breath, "This is insane." The wind carried the faint sound of cicadas from the oak trees above, mixing with the distant hum of a passing delivery truck, and every rustle of leaves seemed amplified as the magnitude of Barbara's hidden authority settled into the consciousness of the neighborhood. Within minutes, at precisely 3:55 p.m., Mary Ellen began to retreat towards the house, fumbling slightly with her purse, her previous arrogance completely replaced with hesitant humility. Barbara stepped forward and with deliberate calmness said, "Any further attempts to undermine me or dismiss my contributions will be documented," and addressed immediately. The subtle firmness in her voice resonated through the driveway, and even the children watching from across the street pressed their faces closer to the fence as if witnessing a masterclass in dignity, accountability, and strategic response. The smell of warm asphalt mingled with honeysuckle and peanut from the cart across the street, forming a strangely grounding atmosphere in the midst of unfolding justice. By 3:57 p.m., the first tangible consequences manifested as Mary Ellen was effectively isolated in her own home, with neighbors whispering observations and recording every movement, some nodding in approval, some shaking their heads at the turn of events. Barbara's control was now recognized by every witness. The young couple with a stroller exchanged glances, murmuring, "Can you believe she handled that with such composure?" while teenagers filming whispered, "Should we post? This is unbelievable." The soft flutter of the paper in Barbara's hand and the gentle jingle of the keys punctuated the realization that the public humiliation Mary Ellen tried to inflict had backfired spectacularly. Neighbors who had initially been mere observers now began offering silent support, some stepping closer to Barbara's side, whispering words of encouragement and solidarity. The soft sound of shutters from cameras, capturing the moment, echoed like applause from a theater audience. The weight of decades of invisible labor finally recognized. As Barbara calmly addressed the witnesses, "You have seen the consequences of ignoring respect, dedication, and careful preparation. Let this be a lesson to everyone about accountability and fairness." The air was heavy with anticipation and relief as Mary Ellen slumped further into defeat. The metallic clink of the keys in Barbara's hand emphasizing the reversal of fortune. At exactly 4:00 p.m., Barbara allowed herself a slight exhale, a release of tension, as the immediate consequences had been executed flawlessly, and the neighborhood seemed collectively to acknowledge her triumph. The wind shifted, carrying the faint aroma of baked goods and blooming flowers, as though the world itself recognized the justice unfolding. She glanced briefly at the cameras of Mr. Henderson, still recording, and nodded subtly. The soft hum of cicadas punctuating her authority, and the subtle rustle of leaves underscoring the public acknowledgement of her victory. Every number documented, every act of past generosity validated in real time. And I whispered to the viewers online, "If the story shocks you as much as it shocked me, share it with someone who needs to see how patience, preparation, and dignity can enforce justice. Mark someone who needs to understand that even hidden contributions have real power, and respect must always be earned and recognized." By 4:05 p.m. on Willow Street, Savannah, Georgia, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting a golden glow across the cracked concrete driveway of 1423 Willow Street, the faint scent of honeysuckle mixed with roasted peanuts from Mr. Henderson's cart and the subtle aroma of pecan pie from the corner cafe created a strangely comforting atmosphere despite the tension that had unfolded only minutes earlier. Barbara Johnson stood with her shoulders squared and a calm expression, her eyes scanning the gathered neighbors, children, teenagers, and couples who had witnessed a complete reversal of the morning's humiliation. Her hand held the jingling keys, as if they were a symbol of decades of patience and preparation now fully recognized by everyone around her, and I realized that what I had witnessed was not just justice. It was a transformation, a lesson in dignity, strategy, and the quiet but undeniable power of preparation. Barbara spoke softly to the crowd who had slowly gathered across the street, murmuring and exchanging astonished glances. "This is not about vengeance," she said. "It is about recognition, respect, and the understanding that patience, preparation, and care are forces more powerful than momentary arrogance." Mary Ellen Johnson stood silently inside the doorway of her home, her face a mixture of disbelief and reluctant respect, and the neighbors nodded in unison, some whispering lessons they would remember forever, others quietly recording every moment for posterity. The cicadas above and the rustle of leaves and the warm summer breeze punctuated the scene, the distant hum of a delivery truck on Maple Avenue, a reminder that life continued, but the memory of this lesson would endure. Barbara continued her reflection in a tone both intimate and confessional. "I have spent decades dedicating myself to this family, organizing budgets, tracking contributions, sewing quilts, and providing care without ever expecting recognition. Yet recognition came in the form of action in the moment when it was most necessary." The numbers: $21, $763.84 in joint accounts, $15, $420.67 in trust allocations, $4,500 in wedding contributions. Decades of careful planning and unseen labor finally visible for all to witness. The neighbors murmured at each figure, nodding their heads in agreement, the subtle metallic clink of keys in her hand, marking the completion of a long-hidden cycle of patience, effort, and moral authority. I could see the transformation not only in Barbara, but in everyone who had witnessed the events. The young couple with a stroller whispered to each other about respect and accountability. The teenagers, recording, murmured about the power of preparation. And the children across the street looked up with wide eyes, absorbing a lesson about dignity, courage, and perseverance. The subtle hum of cicadas, the rustle of leaves, and the fading warmth of the sun all combined into a sensory moment of reflection and shared understanding. Barbara's gaze shifted to me, and as if reading my thoughts, she whispered, "You will carry this story forward," and the soft echo of her voice mingled with the distant sounds of Savannah, creating an imprint in the minds of all present. For anyone watching or witnessing online, I whisper to myself, and the camera share this story with someone who needs to see how patience, preparation, and quiet power can overturn injustice. Mark someone who needs to understand the value of dignity. And effort, comment below if you've ever felt underestimated, and allow this story to inspire you to reclaim your own hidden strength. Subscribe and activate the notification bell to witness more stories where respect, patience, and preparation triumph over arrogance and short-sightedness. And I watched as Barbara slowly turned her attention back to her home, the slight smile on her face reflecting a deep inner peace. The neighbors slowly dispersed, exchanging whispers of awe and admiration, the soft hum of cicadas above, the faint aroma of honeysuckle and peanut from the cart across the street lingering as the perfect sensory punctuation to a story of transformation and empowerment that would be remembered for years to come. And as I walked away from 1423 Willow Street at 4:12 p.m. with the golden light of Savannah brushing the streets, I reflected on the lesson learned: never underestimate quiet preparation, patience, and the moral authority that comes from decades of dedicated effort and respect earned through action and not words. And I whispered to myself and to the viewers, you too have that hidden strength waiting to be revealed. Never let arrogance or disregard go unchallenged. The power is within you. And Barbara Johnson showed us all exactly how it is done, and the faint sound of keys jingling in the breeze served as a final reminder that dignity and preparation always prevail.